Welcome to Stories of Slavery. I'm your host. Today, our focus is 1861 and a truly unsettling incident involving a young black boy who managed to escape from a sealed coffin. The aftermath left witnesses terrified, for no logical explanation could be found. This narrative is difficult and emotionally heavy. So, please, take a breath, center yourself, and listen closely. Before we get into it, remember to hit that subscribe button and drop a comment letting us know which city and country you're tuning in from. Your support is what keeps these important narratives alive and ensures they aren't lost to time. Let's begin. On the morning of September 14, 1861, a 12-year-old boy by the name of Malik was hammered into a pine coffin and lowered 6 feet into the red clay of Louisiana. He was, in fact, not dead. The hours, days, and years that came after would weave together into one of the most quietly devastating stories of survival, defiance, and vengeance the American South has ever tried to erase. This is his story. To truly grasp what Malik endured, you must first understand the world that shaped him. It was a world devoid of kindness. The Beaumont plantation sprawled across 2,400 acres of Louisiana land, roughly 40 miles northwest of New Orleans. Its master was a man named Cornelius Beaumont, a third-generation enslaver whose family's wealth had been built on the backs of black people since 1791. By 1861, Beaumont claimed ownership over 187 souls, men, women, and children. They toiled in the sugarcane fields from a time before dawn until well after nightfall. Their homes were rows of crude wooden cabins with packed dirt floors and no windows. They were branded, flogged, sold, and ripped from their families on a whim by men who viewed them as nothing more than livestock. Malik was born into this existence on March 3, 1849. His mother, Annie, had been transported from a Virginia plantation to Louisiana when she was only 16. She never learned what became of her own mother. She never saw her father again. This was the routine horror of enslavement: families shredded like paper, love as a dangerous gamble, and hope a luxury none could afford. Yet Annie poured a fierce, quiet devotion into her son. She gave him the name Malik, a word she had overheard from an elderly man who still carried the languages of his ancestors. It meant king in Arabic. Annie didn't know the translation, but she knew the word carried strength. She wanted her son to hold something strong within him, even as the world tried its hardest to break him every single day. And try it did. By age 5, Malik was in the fields beside the other children. His small fingers pulled weeds from between the sugarcane stalks. His small feet learned to scurry when the overseer's horse drew near. His small eyes were trained to look down, always down, never meeting a white man's gaze. These were the survival tactics. Defy them, and the whip would find you. Defy them twice, and you might not live to see another sunrise. The overseer at Beaumont was a man named Thomas Garrett. He wasn't the owner, nor was he wealthy. He was a poor white man from Tennessee who had found the only form of authority available to him: power over black bodies. Garrett had a reputation for savagery. He carried a cowhide whip he'd christened Mercy, though he wielded it with none at all. The enslaved people on the plantation feared him more than Cornelius Beaumont himself. Beaumont was cold and aloof, Garrett was near and brutal. Malik learned to become invisible around Thomas Garrett. He learned to move like a shadow and make himself small. Yet, inside Malik, there was a spark that refused to be extinguished, no matter how hard he tried. A stubborn, burning ember that clung to life. His mother saw it and it filled her with fear. "Keep your eyes on the ground," she'd whisper to him at night in their cabin. "Keep your mouth shut. Don't let them see what's inside you, Malik. You hear me? They'll kill you for it. They'll kill you just for having a thought." Malik heard her words, but he couldn't always obey them. When he was 8, he watched Thomas Garrett beat an old man named Solomon nearly to death for being too slow in the fields. Solomon was 63. His back was a patchwork of scars from decades of abuse. His body was worn out, he couldn't move quickly anymore. But Garrett beat him anyway, right in front of everyone, as a lesson. Watching that, something inside Malik shifted. That fire within him didn't just burn, it blazed hotter. He started paying attention. He noted the paths the overseers took after dark. He spotted the weak points in the fence. He took notice of which enslaved people exchanged whispers in the night, sharing information about distant places where black people lived free. He was too young to act on any of this intelligence, but he gathered it like precious stones, storing it deep where no one could see. By 1861, Malik was 12. He'd grown tall for his age, strong from years of labor, and quiet in a way that made others uneasy. The other enslaved children sometimes kept their distance. They thought he was strange. They said he had old eyes. They said he looked at white folks like he was tallying something. They were right. He was tallying every cruelty, every injustice, every moment of pain. He didn't know what he'd do with that tally, but he kept it nonetheless. That spring, everything began to shift. Word drifted to the plantation that war had erupted between the North and the South. Whispers circulated among the enslaved. They heard that the northern states wanted to end slavery. They heard President Abraham Lincoln's name spoken as either enemy or savior, depending on who was talking. The white folks spoke of the war with rage and dread. The enslaved spoke of it with a feeling they hadn't experienced in years, hope. But hope was perilous. And at Beaumont, perilous things were punished. In August of 1861, illness swept through the slave quarters. It began with fever and chills, followed by sweating, weakness, and the inability to eat. The whites called it swamp fever or plantation fever. Today, we'd likely recognize it as a severe strain of malaria, carried by the mosquitoes that bred in the stagnant waters across the Louisiana lowlands. There was no real treatment. The enslaved either fought it off or they didn't. Malik's mother, Annie, was among the first to fall ill. For 3 weeks, Malik watched her battle for her life. He brought water from the well. He sat by her through the nights, listening to her ragged breathing. He pleaded with the other women in the quarters for help, and they did what they could with the limited knowledge and resources they had, brewing teas from willow bark and elderflower, praying, holding Annie's hand, urging her to hold on. But on September 2, 1861, Annie passed away. Malik was alone. He didn't cry when they laid her in the ground. He stood at the edge of the small cemetery reserved for enslaved people, watching them lower his mother's body into the earth. His face was stone. Those around him wept, sang, and called out to God. Malik said nothing. He felt nothing. The fire inside him had turned cold, replaced by something else, something hard and sharp, like a blade. Thomas Garrett observed the burial from a distance on his horse. He didn't mourn the loss of one enslaved woman. His concern was that the sickness was spreading, reducing the plantation's labor force. Every dead slave meant lost money. Garrett had already sent word to Cornelius Beaumont, who was away in New Orleans on business, updating him on the situation. After the burial, Malik returned alone to his cabin. He sat in the dark, motionless for hours. The others in the quarters left him be. They understood grief. They'd lived with it their whole lives. But what came next wasn't grief, it was survival. 10 days after his mother's death, Malik felt the first signs of the fever. It began with a relentless headache. Then came the chills, even though the September air remained thick and warm. By the 3rd day, he could barely stand. By the 5th, he was burning up, his skin scorching to the touch, his eyes glassy and unfocused. The other enslaved people did what they could. A woman named Ruth, a friend of his mother's, tended to him as best she could, giving him water and trying to cool his fever with damp cloths. She sat with him, talking even when he was too delirious to respond. On the 7th day of his illness, September 14, 1861, Thomas Garrett arrived at the slave quarters with a white man Malik had never seen before. He was Dr. Edward Marsh, a physician from a nearby plantation summoned to assess the outbreak. Dr. Marsh wasn't a compassionate man. He wasn't particularly skilled either. He was simply someone with a medical degree willing to treat enslaved people for a fee. His examinations were swift and careless. He touched his patients as little as possible. He didn't see them as people, just livestock. When Dr. Marsh entered the cabin where Malik lay, he didn't approach the boy. He stood in the doorway, a handkerchief pressed to his nose and mouth, observing Malik from about 10 feet away. "How long has he been like this?" he asked Garrett. "Week or so," Garrett answered. "Fever won't break. He hasn't eaten in 3 days." Dr. Marsh nodded slowly, watching Malik's chest rise and fall with shallow, labored breaths. He saw the sweat soaking the thin mattress beneath the boy. In less than 30 seconds, he made his diagnosis. He's finished, Dr. Marsh declared. Won't make it through the night. I'd say seal him up before sundown. Don't want it spreading further. Garrett nodded. I'll have the box made. And just like that, two white men who never once touched Malik, never listened to his heartbeat, never considered he might still be alive, sealed his fate. Ruth, standing in the corner of the cabin, stepped forward. Sir, please, she said, her voice shaking. He's still breathing. He's still, shut your mouth, Garrett cut her off without a glance. Get back to work, all of you. I don't want anyone near this cabin until the body's dealt with. Ruth didn't argue. She couldn't. To argue was to die. She looked at Malik one last time, tears streaming, then left the cabin with the others. Malik was alone. What transpired in the hours after has been pieced together from the few accounts that survived, testimonies from those present that day who lived to tell. Some were recorded years later by abolitionists and historians. Some were passed down through oral tradition in Louisiana's black communities. Some were whispered in secret for generations, never written but never forgotten. Here's what we know. Around 4 p.m. on September 14, 1861, two enslaved men named Jacob and Peter were ordered to build a coffin. Skilled carpenters who'd made many coffins before, they worked quickly using rough pine boards from the plantation's lumber. The coffin was plain, functional, measuring 6 feet long and 2 feet wide. Built for purpose, not dignity. Around 5 p.m., Thomas Garrett and 3 other men entered the cabin where Malik lay. They didn't check if he was still breathing. They didn't check his pulse. They simply lifted his limp body from the mattress and carried him outside. Malik was placed in the coffin while still alive, eyes closed, body burning with fever, deep in delirium between consciousness and death. But he wasn't dead. His heart still beat. His lungs still drew air. He was alive. The men nailed the coffin shut with 16 iron nails. They used a hammer, driving each nail deep into the wood, sealing the box completely. No air holes. No consideration they might be wrong. Around 6 p.m., as the sun set over the Louisiana lowlands, the coffin was carried to the burial ground at the plantation's edge. A grave had already been dug, 6 feet deep, the standard depth for plantation burials. Using ropes, the coffin was lowered. The men who dug the grave began shoveling dirt on top. Ruth watched from a distance. She wasn't allowed closer. None of the enslaved were permitted at the burial. Garrett had forbidden it, not wanting a fuss over a dead boy. But Ruth watched anyway, until the grave was filled and the men patted down the earth with their shovels, until they walked away, leaving only a small mound of fresh red dirt. Then she returned to her cabin and wept. What Ruth didn't know, what no one on that plantation knew, was that at the very moment the last shovel of dirt fell on the grave, Malik opened his eyes. He didn't know where he was at first. Only darkness. Complete, total, suffocating darkness. He couldn't see a thing. He couldn't hear anything but his own ragged breathing. He tried to move, his hands hit wood. He tried to sit up, his forehead hit wood. He tried to turn, wood on every side. Panic came first, a blind, animal panic that made him thrash and scream and claw at the walls around him. He couldn't understand. The fever had broken at some point, perhaps in those final moments before the coffin sealed. Now his mind was clear enough to grasp the horror. He was in a box. Underground. Buried alive. Malik screamed until his throat was raw. He pounded on the coffin lid until his fists bled. He kicked and thrashed and begged for someone to hear. But no one could. The grave was too deep. The earth too thick. His screams never reached the surface. The air began to thin. This part of the story is the hardest to tell, imagining what a 12-year-old boy faced in the most terrifying death possible, alone in the dark, with no rescue coming. But Malik didn't give up. As the air grew scarce and his body weakened, something inside him shifted. That fire burning since childhood, the one his mother tried to shield, the one he'd hidden from the whites who wanted to destroy it, that fire roared to life. He wouldn't die in this box. He wouldn't let them win. He wouldn't become another nameless grave on a plantation that had already swallowed so many. Malik began to work. The coffin had been built hastily. The wood was rough pine, far from the strongest. The nails were iron, but driven in a rush. Weaknesses existed. Malik couldn't see them, but he could feel them. His bloody fingers traced the coffin's seams, searching for any gap, any flaw, any point of vulnerability. Near his left shoulder, he found one, a spot where two boards met imperfectly, leaving a small gap. He could feel air through it, just a tiny whisper, but enough to spark hope. Malik dug at the gap with his fingers. The rough, splintered wood tore at his skin. Blood mixed with dirt and sweat. The pain was agonizing, but he didn't stop. He couldn't. To stop was to die. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Time lost meaning in the darkness. Malik worked until his fingers grew numb, until he couldn't feel the wood anymore, until his hands were raw, bleeding instruments of survival. Then, finally, the board gave way. A piece of wood, maybe 6 inches long and 4 inches wide, broke free from the coffin wall. Dirt poured in through the opening. Malik pushed his face toward the gap, gasping for air, filling his lungs with the smell of earth and clay. He wasn't free yet. He was still 6 feet underground with hundreds of pounds of dirt pressing down. But the coffin was no longer a sealed tomb. It was just another obstacle. What Malik did next would later be called impossible by those who heard the story. But Malik didn't know it was impossible. He only knew he had to keep moving. He began clawing upward through the dirt. He pushed the broken boards aside and forced his body into the gap. The earth pressed from all sides, trying to crush him, trying to suffocate him. But he kept moving. He dug with his hands, his elbows, his knees. He pushed and scraped and fought for every inch. Dirt filled his nose and mouth. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't see. He could only dig upward, always upward. His lungs burned. His muscles screamed. His mind began to fade, losing its grip on consciousness. Still, he dug. And then, after what felt like an eternity, his hand broke through the surface. Fresh air, night air, the cool, sweet air of the Louisiana lowlands, filled his lungs as he dragged himself from his own grave. He lay beside the mound of dirt, gasping, coughing, shaking. His entire body was caked in clay. His hands were destroyed, skin torn away, bones visible in places. He was more dead than alive, but he was alive. Malik lay there a long time, staring at the stars, the same stars that had watched his mother's burial, that had witnessed generations of enslaved people suffer and die on this land. He didn't know the time or the day. He only knew he'd done something that should have been impossible. He'd escaped the coffin. He'd clawed his way from his own grave. And now, lying under those silent stars, he understood something with perfect clarity: his old life was over. The boy who'd been Malik, the one who kept his eyes down and mouth shut, who hid his fire from the world, that boy was dead. He died in that coffin. What emerged from the grave was something else entirely. But Malik couldn't stay. Sunrise would come, and with it, someone would notice the disturbed grave. The alarm would sound. The dogs would be brought out. The hunt would begin. Malik forced himself up. His legs were weak, trembling with exhaustion and lingering fever. His hands throbbed with pain so intense he could barely think. But he stood, then began to walk. He didn't know where he was going. He only knew he had to get away from Beaumont, to vanish into the swamps and forests and darkness before anyone realized what happened. He walked north. He'd heard whispers about the North, freedom, a world where black people weren't property. He didn't know how far it was. He didn't know if he'd survive the journey. But he walked anyway, one painful step at a time, leaving behind the grave that tried to swallow him. The night was his only ally. The darkness that nearly killed him underground now protected him above. He moved through fields and forests like a ghost, avoiding roads, staying away from any place he might be seen. Swamp water chilled his legs as he waded through. Cypress branches reached down like skeletal fingers. But he kept moving. By sunrise on September 15, 1861, Malik was 3 miles from Beaumont, hidden in a dense thicket, body pressed flat, breathing slow and shallow. In the distance, dogs barked. They'd found the grave. They knew he was gone. The hunt had begun. Malik stayed hidden all day, no movement, no food, no water. Just lying there, listening to men and dogs search. Sometimes they came so close he could hear their voices, cursing and shouting, promising terrible punishments when they found him. But they didn't. When night fell again, Malik moved. His body was weaker now, pushed far beyond its limits. His wounds had begun to fester. The fever threatened to return. But he kept walking north, always north. On the third night of his escape, something happened that would alter his life forever. Malik had stopped to rest by a small creek, drinking muddy water and trying to clean his wounds. He was so focused on survival he didn't hear the approaching footsteps until too late. A hand clamped over his mouth from behind. A voice whispered in his ear, "Don't make a sound, boy. We're friends." Malik's first instinct was to fight, but he was too weak, and the hands holding him too strong. He went limp, accepting whatever fate came next. The hand released his mouth. Malik turned to see two figures in the moonlight, black, a man and a woman, both in dark clothing, watching him with cautious concern. "Lord have mercy," the woman whispered, staring at his ruined hands. "What happened to you, child?" Malik didn't answer. He couldn't find the words. He just stood there, swaying, waiting. The men stepped forward. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a scar down his left cheek, his eyes held kindness but also something hard beneath, something that had seen too much suffering to be soft. "My name's Samuel," he said quietly. "This is my wife, Clara. We're conductors on the railroad. You understand what that means?" Malik understood. He'd heard whispers about the Underground Railroad, the secret network of safe houses and hidden routes helping enslaved people escape to freedom. He'd never dared to believe he might find it. "They buried me," Malik said, his voice barely a whisper. "Put me in a box and buried me. But I got out." Samuel and Clara exchanged a look. In all their years helping runaways, they'd never heard a story like this. "We need to move," Samuel said finally. "There's a safe house about 5 miles from here. Can you walk?" Malik nodded. He didn't know if he could walk 5 more feet, let alone 5 miles, but he'd try. He'd crawl if he had to. "Then let's go," Samuel said. "We'll get you somewhere safe, and then you can tell us everything." They walked through the night, Samuel and Clara flanking Malik, supporting him when he stumbled, urging him forward when he faltered. The safe house was a small cabin deep in the bayou, surrounded by water, reachable only by a narrow path winding through cypress trees. It belonged to a free black family named Washington, part of the Underground Railroad for nearly a decade. When they arrived, Malik collapsed on the cabin floor and didn't move for 2 days. The Washingtons cared for him, cleaned and bandaged his hands, fed him broth and bread, let him sleep and heal and slowly return to himself. When he finally woke fully on the 3rd day, Clara sat beside him, watching with worried eyes. "You were talking in your sleep," she said softly. "Calling for your mama." Malik looked away. Mention of his mother brought pain sharper than any physical suffering. "She's gone," he said. Clara nodded, offering no empty comfort. She simply reached out and placed her hand over his bandaged ones. "A lot of us have lost people. That's the world we live in. But you're still here, child. You came back from the grave itself. That means something. That means you've got a purpose." Malik didn't respond, but he thought about her words long after she left. Over the following weeks, his body slowly healed. His hands would never be the same, the scars permanent reminders of his escape, but they healed enough to use again. His strength returned. The fever didn't come back. Yet something else was happening to Malik during those weeks, something internal. The fire that always burned inside him was transforming into something more focused, more deliberate. He began asking questions. He began learning. Samuel became his teacher. The older men had been born free in Philadelphia but came south to help others escape. He knew things Malik had never imagined, reading and writing, navigating by the stars, moving through hostile territory unseen, fighting. "You want revenge," Samuel said one night as they sat outside watching the stars. "I can see it in your eyes. You want to go back to that plantation and make them pay for what they did." Malik didn't deny it. "They buried me alive. They killed my mother. They deserve to die." Samuel nodded slowly. "Maybe they do. But if you go back there now, angry and alone, you know what'll happen. They'll catch you. They'll kill you. And then it'll all be for nothing. Then what am I supposed to do? Malik demanded. Just forget. Just pretend it never happened. No, Samuel said. You remember. You carry it with you, but you use it. You turn it into something bigger than just your own pain. You think you're the only one who suffered. Every black man, woman, and child in this country has a story like yours. Maybe not buried alive, but beaten, sold, separated from families, worked to death. If we all ran off for personal revenge, we'd all be dead. He turned to look directly at Malik. There's a war coming, a real war. And when it comes, there'll be a chance to do something that matters. To free not just yourself, but thousands, maybe millions. That's the revenge that counts. That's the revenge that lasts. Malik was silent a long time, staring into the bayou's darkness. How do I become part of it? He finally asked. Samuel smiled, the scar on his face twisting with the expression. You already are, son. You already are. In the months that followed, Malik became part of the Underground Railroad. Too young to be a conductor alone, he assisted Samuel and Clara in their work, learning routes and safe houses, signals and codes, moving through the night like a shadow. He also learned to read and write. Clara taught him using a worn Bible and a few precious books smuggled into the safe house over the years. Malik absorbed learning with a hunger that surprised everyone, including himself. Words held power. Knowledge held power. He wanted all the power he could get. Yet even as he learned and grew, Malik never forgot Beaumont. He never forgot Thomas Garrett and Dr. Edward Marsh. He never forgot those 16 iron nails sealing him in his coffin, or the feeling of dirt pressing down, stealing his air. He'd go back someday, he swore it to himself, alone in the safe house's darkness. He'd go back and make them remember him. 1862 brought unexpected changes. The war between North and South intensified. Battles raged across Virginia and Tennessee. The Confederate states dug in, determined to preserve their way of life, meaning slavery. The Union pushed back slowly, realizing this war wouldn't be quick or easy. And in Louisiana, word spread of something extraordinary, Federal forces advancing toward New Orleans. The Union Army was coming south. For enslaved people throughout Louisiana, this news was lightning in a dark sky. Freedom was no longer a distant dream, it drew nearer each day. Malik heard it and felt something shift inside him. The time for hiding was ending. The time for action was approaching. In April 1862, Union naval forces under Admiral David Farragut assaulted New Orleans. The battle was fierce but brief, Confederate defenses crumbled. On April 25, 1862, New Orleans fell to the Union. The Confederacy's largest city was now in Union hands. For Louisiana's enslaved people, everything changed. In the ensuing chaos, thousands fled plantations toward Union lines, desperate and hopeful. The Union Army didn't know what to do with them at first. These refugees were classified as contraband of war, a dehumanizing term that nonetheless offered a path to freedom. Malik watched from his bayou hiding place, planning his next move. Now 13, he'd grown taller and stronger in the months since escape. The scars on his hands had faded to pale lines against his dark skin, still visible, still reminders. He was no longer that frightened boy buried alive. He was something else now, harder, more dangerous. It's time, he told Samuel one morning in May 1862. I'm going to New Orleans. Samuel didn't try to stop him. He'd known this day would come. What are you going to do there? Find the Union Army. Join them. Fight. Samuel nodded slowly. You're young, too young, maybe. But I've seen what you can do. What you've survived. If anyone can make it, it's you. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. This is a letter of introduction. It'll help when you get there. Show it to the right people, and they'll know you're one of ours. Malik tucked it carefully into his shirt. Thank you for everything. Samuel placed a hand on his shoulder. Don't thank me yet. The hard part's just beginning. But remember what I told you, make it count. Make it last. Malik nodded, then left the safe house for the last time, beginning his journey to New Orleans. The trip took 3 weeks. He traveled mostly at night, following routes learned during his Underground Railroad days, avoiding main roads and populated areas, moving through swamps and forests like a ghost. When he finally reached New Orleans' outskirts in early June, exhausted but alive, the city was in chaos. Union soldiers patrolled streets, trying to maintain order among a hostile population. Confederate sympathizers schemed in secret. Refugees from plantations poured in daily. Malik found Union headquarters and presented Samuel's letter. The officer who read it, a young captain from Massachusetts named William Shaw, looked at him with surprise and skepticism. "You're telling me you escaped a plantation after being buried alive?" "Yes, sir." Malik's voice was calm and steady. He'd told this story many times now, it no longer shook him. Captain Shaw studied him, seeing the scars on his hands, the old eyes in the young face, something that couldn't be faked. "The Army doesn't officially accept Negro soldiers," Shaw said finally. "Not yet. But things are changing. Some believe that might happen soon." "I can wait," Malik said. "I'll do whatever work you need until then. But when the time comes, I want to fight." Captain Shaw nodded slowly. "I believe you will, son. I believe you will." So Malik became part of the Union effort in New Orleans, working as a laborer at first, building fortifications, moving supplies alongside other refugees from plantations. They recognized something in Malik, something fierce and unbroken, and respected him for it. Word of his Coffin escape spread through the refugee community. Some didn't believe it at first, too incredible, too impossible. But Malik showed them his hands, the scars, and slowly the story became legend. They called him the boy who came back from the grave. They said he'd been touched by something, blessed or cursed, given power ordinary people lacked. They said he couldn't be killed, that he'd lead them to freedom. Malik didn't encourage these stories, but he didn't deny them either. He understood a legend's power, hope needed something to believe in. And he had plans for that power, plans reaching back to Louisiana, to Beaumont Plantation, to a man named Thomas Garrett who thought he'd buried a boy forever. The reckoning was coming. Malik just had to be patient enough to wait. The summer of 1862 was one of Louisiana's hottest on record. Air hung thick and heavy over New Orleans, carrying river smells, swamps, and the slow decay of the old Confederate order. Union soldiers sweated through wool uniforms. Refugees crowded into makeshift camps, waiting for news, for change, for the world to become something new. Malik waited with them, but his waiting had purpose. In July, something changed everything. General Benjamin Butler, Union commander in New Orleans, made a decision that sent shockwaves through the South. He began accepting black men into Union military forces, not as soldiers yet, but as laborers and support personnel attached to the Army. A small step, but a step nonetheless. Malik was among the first to volunteer, assigned to a labor battalion working on fortifications along the Mississippi River. The work was brutal, digging trenches, building walls under the scorching sun, hauling timber and stones until muscles screamed, alongside white soldiers who sometimes looked with contempt, sometimes curiosity, occasionally respect. Malik didn't complain or slow down. He worked harder than anyone, pushing his body to its limits and beyond. The other men noticed, officers noticed. Word spread about the young men with scarred hands who never seemed to tire or break. Captain William Shaw took special interest. Shaw was an abolitionist from a family of abolitionists. His father helped found the American Anti-Slavery Society in Boston, his mother sheltered runaway slaves. For Shaw, the war wasn't just about preserving the Union but ending slavery's great evil. "You're wasted in a labor battalion," Shaw told Malik one August evening. "You've got something the other men don't. The way you carry yourself, the way you think, you're a leader." Malik shook his head. "I'm just trying to survive, sir. Same as everyone else." "No," Shaw said firmly. "You're not. You're trying to do something more. I can see it in your eyes. You've got a fire, Malik. Don't hide it from me." Malik was silent a moment, then said, "There's a plantation about 40 miles from here, Beaumont. That's where I came from. That's where they buried me." Shaw nodded slowly. Everyone had heard the story by now. "When the time comes," Malik continued, "I want to be there. I want to be the one who sets those people free, the one still there, who knew my mother, who watched them put me in the ground." Shaw studied him. "That might be possible. Things are changing fast. The president's talking about emancipation. If he does it, really does it, this war becomes something different. A war of liberation. And when that happens, we'll need men like you. I'll be ready, Malik said. I've been ready my whole life. On September 22, 1862, President Abraham Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that on January 1, 1863, all enslaved people in Confederate states would be considered free. News spread through Union camps and refugee settlements like wildfire. People wept, prayed, danced in New Orleans streets, singing freedom songs forbidden on plantations. Malik didn't dance or weep. He simply nodded, confirming something he'd always known was coming. The war had become a war of liberation. Now he could become what he was meant to be. In fall 1862, the Union Army officially began recruiting black soldiers for combat units. The 1st Louisiana Native Guard, one of the first black regiments, was reorganized under federal command. Originally formed by free black men in New Orleans who'd offered services to the Confederacy, a complicated decision from complicated circumstances, the regiment was now expanded to include escaped slaves and refugees. Malik enlisted in November 1862. He was 14, though he claimed 16 on his papers. No one questioned him. Tall enough, strong enough, with a bearing making him seem older. The recruiting officer looked at his scarred hands and asked nothing. Basic training at a camp outside New Orleans lasted 6 weeks. Malik learned soldier skills, marching in formation, loading and firing a rifle, using a bayonet, discipline and order for survival in battle. He also learned to read military maps, understand tactical formations, the chain of command, communication protocols. He absorbed everything with the same hunger driving him to learn reading and writing. But the most important thing Malik learned wasn't taught by any officer or drill sergeant. He learned it from the other men who'd survived the same horrors, been whipped and branded and sold, watched families torn apart, lived under slavery's crushing weight. Now, for the first time, they had weapons, uniforms, a chance to fight back. The rage burning in Malik burned in all of them, but controlled, focused. They understood their performance in battle would determine whether black soldiers were taken seriously. They fought not just for themselves but for every enslaved person still in chains. That responsibility shaped them, hardened them, made them formidable. The 1st Louisiana Native Guard saw its first real combat in May 1863 at the Siege of Port Hudson, a Confederate stronghold on the Mississippi River, heavily fortified and stubbornly defended. The Union needed it to gain complete river control and split the Confederacy. On May 27, 1863, the 1st and 3rd Louisiana Native Guards were ordered to assault the fortifications, a near-impossible mission uphill against entrenched positions. Malik was there, part of a company commanded by Captain André Caillou, a free black man from New Orleans known for bravery and eloquence. He'd sworn to lead his men to victory or die trying. The assault began at dawn. Union artillery opened fire, shells screamed through the air. Then the order came to advance, and the men of the 1st Louisiana Native Guard charged. Malik ran forward, rifle in hand, heart pounding, lungs burning. The ground was torn and muddy from bombardment. Air thick with smoke and gunpowder. Ahead, Confederate fortifications loomed like a wall of earth and timber, bristling with rifles and cannons. The rebels opened fire. Men began falling around Malik, soldiers he'd trained with, come to know and respect, cut down by withering fire. But he didn't stop. He couldn't. To stop was to die. Captain Caillou led the charge, waving his sword, shouting encouragement. Malik saw him take a bullet in the arm, keep going. Another in the chest, still going. Saw him finally fall, crumpling just yards from Confederate lines. The assault failed. Union forces were driven back with heavy casualties. But the black soldiers had proven something that day: they could fight, were willing to die for freedom, were soldiers. Malik survived with a bullet graze across his left shoulder and shrapnel wounds in his leg. As he lay in the field hospital that night, listening to the wounded and dying moan, he thought of Captain Caillou and all who'd fallen. They died fighting, as free men with weapons and courage, more than most enslaved people ever got. That was something. Malik recovered and returned to his regiment. Over following months, he participated in several more engagements along the Mississippi, fighting at Milliken's Bend in June 1863, another brutal battle where black soldiers proved their worth, and in smaller skirmishes throughout Louisiana, disrupting Confederate supply lines and liberating enslaved people from plantations. With each battle, Malik grew more skilled, confident, dangerous. He was promoted to corporal in fall 1863, one of the youngest non-commissioned officers in his regiment. His superiors recognized his intelligence and leadership. Fellow soldiers respected him not just for combat skills but for the legend surrounding him. The story of his Coffin escape had spread through Louisiana's black regiments. Men who'd never met him knew his name and story. He'd become a symbol larger than himself. But Malik hadn't forgotten his personal mission, Beaumont, Thomas Garrett. Every night before sleep, he'd run fingers over his scars, remembering the coffin's darkness, the earth's weight pressing down, the faces of men who'd sealed him inside and walked away. The time was coming. He could feel it. In spring 1864, Union forces in Louisiana launched a major offensive into the interior, aiming to push Confederates out entirely and establish control over valuable sugar-producing parishes. This campaign would take the army through territory Malik knew well, including Beaumont. When Malik learned of the planned offensive, he went to Captain Shaw, now promoted to major on divisional staff. "Sir, I need to be part of the force moving through the Lafourche region. That's where Beaumont is. Where I came from." Shaw looked at him with understanding. "I know. I've been thinking about this. There'll be a special detachment to liberate plantations in that area, free the enslaved, secure useful resources for the Union. I want you part of it." Malik nodded, jaw tight. "Thank you, sir. But Malik," Shaw continued seriously, "I need you to understand, this is a military operation, not a personal vendetta. We're going to free people, not settle scores. Whatever happened to you there, whatever you're feeling, you need to keep it controlled. Understand?" "I understand, sir." Shaw studied him. "Do you? I've seen men lose themselves to revenge, good soldiers become monsters because they couldn't let go of anger. I don't want that for you." Malik met his gaze steadily. "It won't, sir. I know what I'm doing. Why I'm doing it. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice." Shaw was silent a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right. I believe you. The detachment leaves in 2 weeks. Be ready." Malik was ready. He'd been ready for 3 years. The detachment setting out for Lafourche in April 1864 consisted of about 200 men, a mix of white soldiers from Massachusetts and black soldiers from the Louisiana Native Guards. Commanded by Colonel James Harrison, a career officer with little patience for sentiment but great respect for efficiency, their mission was straightforward: move through the region, liberate the enslaved, seize Confederate property, eliminate any rebel resistance, gather intelligence. For Malik, it was more, the culmination of everything he'd survived, learned, become. The moment he'd waited for since clawing his way from his own grave. The first plantations they encountered surrendered without resistance. Owners had fled, leaving only enslaved people and elderly overseers. Soldiers moved through quickly, informing the enslaved they were free, offering them the choice to follow the army or stay and work the land for themselves. Most chose to follow, gathering few possessions, collecting children, joining the growing column of refugees trailing the military detachment. Their faces mixed fear and hope, disbelief and joy. Some wept, some laughed, some walked in silence, as if speaking would break the spell and return them to bondage. Malik watched and remembered what it felt like to be trapped, hopeless, believing freedom an impossible dream. He remembered his mother and the fierce, quiet love she'd given him. He remembered the promise made in the coffin's darkness. He was keeping it now. Every person liberated was a victory. Every chain broken was a blow against the system that tried to destroy him. On the 5th day of the campaign, they reached Beaumont's outskirts. Malik recognized the land immediately: sugarcane fields stretching toward the horizon, the row of cypress trees along the western boundary, the distant gleam of the big house on the hill. Everything exactly as remembered. Yet everything was different. He was different. Colonel Harrison called a halt and sent scouts ahead. They returned an hour later with their report. The plantation was occupied by a small Confederate force, maybe 30 men, mostly local militia. The owner, Cornelius Beaumont, had died the previous year of natural causes. His son, Edmund Beaumont, was away fighting with the Confederate Army. The property was managed by overseer Thomas Garrett. When Malik heard that name, his hands clenched into fists. The scars on his palms seemed to burn. "We'll attack at dawn," Colonel Harrison announced. "Standard approach, artillery first to soften positions, then infantry assault. I want this wrapped quickly." Malik stepped forward. "Sir, permission to speak." Harrison looked surprised. Corporals didn't usually address colonels directly. "What is it?" "Sir, I know this plantation. I grew up here. I know the layout, buildings, terrain. I know where they'll likely position defenses. Let me lead a flanking party through the swamps to the east. We can hit them from behind while they're focused on the main assault. It'll be over faster with fewer casualties." Harrison considered this. "You're from this plantation?" "Yes, sir. I escaped from here in 1861. The colonel's eyes narrowed. "You're the one they buried alive?" "Yes, sir." A murmur went through assembled soldiers. Many had heard the story, but few realized Malik's plantation was their objective. Harrison was silent, weighing the tactical value against the risk of sending a man with a personal stake into leadership. Finally, he nodded. "All right, Corporal. Take 12 men and approach from the east. Wait for the artillery barrage, then hit them from behind. But I want prisoners, not corpses. We're soldiers, not executioners." "Understood, sir." Malik chose his men carefully, soldiers he knew, trusted, who understood what was at stake. They moved out that evening, circling wide around the plantation, using swamps and forests as cover. Malik led them through darkness with the confidence of someone who'd walked these paths 1,000 times in another life, when he was still a slave. They reached their position just before dawn, hidden in a thicket of oak trees about 200 yards from the rear of the Confederate defensive line. From here, Malik could see the slave quarters where he'd grown up. The small cemetery at the property's edge where his mother was buried, where he'd been buried. The grave was still there, he could just make out its shape in pre-dawn light, the earth settled over years but the mound still visible. Malik stared at it a long moment, then looked away, focusing on the task. The artillery barrage began at first light. Union cannons opened fire, sending shells screaming across the fields. The rebels scrambled to defenses, returning fire with rifles and a single small cannon. Noise was deafening, air thick with smoke and flying debris. Malik waited, watching Confederate defenders through the chaos, positions, movements, weaknesses. He saw Thomas Garrett emerge from the big house, shouting orders. The overseer was older now, hair gray, face lined, but moved with the same brutal energy Malik remembered. The same men who'd ordered his burial, watched him be nailed into a coffin without checking if he was alive. Rage surged through Malik, hot and fierce. But he controlled it, channeled it, used it. "Now," he said quietly. "Move." The flanking party burst from the tree line and charged toward the Confederate rear. The rebels, focused on the main assault from the front, were caught completely off guard. Malik's men hit them hard and fast, firing as they ran, overwhelming confused defenders with sheer ferocity. The fight was brief but intense. Confederate soldiers fell or surrendered as Union forces closed from both directions. Within 20 minutes, it was over. Beaumont Plantation was in Union hands. Malik walked through the aftermath, stepping over bodies and debris, looking for one person only. He found Thomas Garrett hiding in the smokehouse behind the big house. The overseer had a pistol, but when he saw Malik approaching with 6 soldiers at his back, he dropped it and raised his hands. "Don't shoot," Garrett said, voice trembling. "I'm unarmed. I surrender." Malik stopped a few feet away, looking at the men who'd caused so much suffering, buried him alive, haunted his nightmares for 3 years. Garrett looked back, at first no recognition, just the fear of a defeated man facing enemy soldiers. Then something shifted. Garrett's eyes widened, his face went pale. "No," he whispered. "It can't be. You're dead. I watched them bury you." Malik said nothing, just stood there, letting Garrett see him, letting reality sink in. "You were dead," Garrett repeated, voice rising with hysteria. "The doctor said you were dead. We put you in the ground. We put you in the ground." "You buried me alive," Malik said quietly, his voice calm, steady, controlled. "You didn't check if I was breathing. You didn't check my pulse. You just nailed the coffin shut and threw dirt on top of me. Garrett was shaking now. It wasn't my fault. The doctor said you were dead. I was just following orders. You were the overseer. You gave the orders. You watched them dig the grave, lower the coffin. You could have stopped at any time, but you didn't, because I was just another slave to you. Another piece of property. You didn't care if I was alive or dead. Please, Garrett begged. Please don't kill me. I'll do anything. Tell you anything you want. Just please don't kill me. Malik looked at him a long moment. He thought about everything this man had done, not just to him, but to everyone on this plantation. The beatings, the whippings, families torn apart, lives destroyed. His mother working herself to death under this man's brutal supervision. All the others who'd suffered and died because of Thomas Garrett. The rage was there, burning in his chest. The desire for revenge overwhelming. He could kill this man right now, and no one would stop him. No one would blame him. This man deserved to die. But then Malik remembered something. Samuel's words in the bayou all those years ago, if we all ran off for personal revenge, we'd all be dead. And that's the revenge that counts. That's the revenge that lasts. What Major Shaw said before the mission, this isn't about revenge. It's about justice. Malik looked at Thomas Garrett, trembling and begging on his knees, and made a decision. I'm not going to kill you, he said. Garrett's face flooded with relief. Thank you. Thank you. I knew you. I'm going to do something worse, Malik continued. I'm going to let you live. Long enough to see everything you believed in destroyed. I'm going to let you watch as every slave on this plantation walks away free. I'm going to let you watch as the world you built crumbles to dust. And then I'm going to let the Union Army put you on trial for your crimes. He turned to the soldiers behind him. Take him into custody. He's to be held for military tribunal. The soldiers dragged Garrett to his feet and hauled him away. The overseer screamed now, cursing, threatening, pleading, but his words had no power anymore. He was nothing, just another defeated rebel waiting for judgment. Malik watched him go, then turned and walked toward the slave quarters. The enslaved people of Beaumont had gathered in the open space between their cabins. Over 100 of them, men, women, children, watching Union soldiers with a mixture of hope and fear. They'd heard gunfire, seen the battle. They didn't yet understand what it meant. Malik walked into the center of the gathering, looking at faces, searching for ones he recognized. Ruth, the woman who'd cared for him during his fever, older and grayer now but still alive. Jacob, one of the carpenters who'd built his coffin, his face creased with shock recognizing the boy he'd helped bury. Others, faces from childhood, people who'd known his mother, watched him grow up. My name is Malik, he said, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. Some of you remember me. Some of you thought I was dead. I was born here. My mother, Annie, is buried over there in that cemetery. 3 years ago, they buried me there, too. But I didn't die. I got out. I found the Union Army. I became a soldier. And now, I've come back. He paused, letting words sink in. The war is turning. The Confederacy is losing. And by order of the President of the United States, all enslaved people in the rebel states are now free. That means you, all of you, you don't belong to anyone anymore. You belong to yourselves. For a moment, absolute silence. Then someone began to weep. Then someone else. Then weeping turned to shouts of joy, shouts to singing, and suddenly the air filled with voices raised in celebration. Malik stood in the middle of it all, letting the sound wash over him. This was what he'd been fighting for. Not revenge, not death, liberation, freedom, justice. Ruth pushed through the crowd and stood before him, tears streaming. I prayed for you. Every night after they buried you, I prayed. That somehow, some way, you were still alive. I never stopped believing. Malik reached out and took her hands. Your prayers were answered, Ruth. I'm here. And we're all free now. Over the following hours, Union soldiers secured the plantation and began transitioning it from slave labor camp to liberated territory. The enslaved people were given the choice to stay and work the land as free laborers or follow the army to New Orleans for employment and new lives. Most chose to leave. They gathered belongings, collected children, joined the refugee column heading south, walking away from the only home most had ever known, leaving behind fields that had consumed their labor, cabins that confined them, graves of loved ones. Before leaving, Malik visited his mother's grave one last time. Standing there in fading afternoon light, looking at the small wooden marker with no name, just a cross carved by someone who'd cared enough to remember. "I did it, Mama," he said quietly. "I kept the fire burning, just like you always wanted. I didn't let them break me. And now I've come back and set everyone free." He knelt and placed his hand on the earth, feeling cool soil beneath scarred palm. "I wish you could have seen it. I wish you could have walked out of here with me. But I know you're watching somehow. I know you're proud." He stayed there a long time, alone with memories and grief. Then stood, wiped his eyes, and walked away. There was still work. Still a war to win. The campaign through Lafourche continued several more weeks. Malik and his detachment liberated 7 more plantations, freeing over 1,000 enslaved people. With each liberation, Malik's legend grew. Stories spread about the soldier who'd escaped his own grave, couldn't be killed, brought freedom wherever he went. Some said he was blessed by God, others, protected by ancestor spirits, a few whispered he'd made darker deals. Malik didn't encourage or deny these stories. He understood their value. A legend was a weapon like any other, inspiring allies, terrifying enemies, giving hope to the hopeless and fear to the fearful. And there was still so much work. The war continued through 1864 into 1865. Malik fought in several more engagements, proving himself again as soldier and leader. He was promoted to sergeant in fall 1864, a remarkable achievement for someone who'd been a slave just 3 years earlier. In April 1865, the war finally ended. General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse, closing America's bloodiest conflict. The Confederacy was defeated. Slavery abolished. 4 million people free. When news reached Malik's regiment, celebration was unlike anything he'd witnessed. Men who'd been slaves just years earlier threw hats in the air, embraced with tears streaming. They'd done it. 1. Proven they weren't property but human beings capable of fighting and dying for their own liberation. Malik celebrated with them, but even amid joy, heaviness lingered in his heart. The war was over, but the struggle wasn't. He knew Confederate defeat was just beginning. There'd be resistance, violence, attempts to push black people back into bondage through new laws and systems of oppression. The work of freedom was never finished, it had to be defended and renewed with every generation. In months after the war, Malik was discharged from the army with honors. He was 17, a decorated veteran with scars on his hands and fire in his heart. He had no family, no home, no clear path forward. But he had something more valuable: purpose. Malik returned to Louisiana and threw himself into Reconstruction. He helped establish schools for the formerly enslaved, teaching reading and writing forbidden under slavery. He worked with the Freedmen's Bureau to secure land and resources for black families building new lives. He organized communities and advocated for rights in the face of hostile white resistance. He also kept track of Thomas Garrett. The former overseer had been tried by military tribunal in 1864, convicted of crimes against humanity, and sentenced to 10 years hard labor at a federal prison in New York. Not the death sentence some demanded, but justice of a kind. Garrett would spend the next decade breaking rocks and digging ditches, experiencing a fraction of the suffering he'd inflicted. Malik received the news with grim satisfaction. He'd told Garrett that living would be worse than dying. He'd been right. But Malik didn't dwell on revenge. He was too busy building something new. In 1868, he married a woman named Sarah, a former slave from Mississippi who'd escaped to New Orleans during the war. Together they had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Malik named his daughter Annie after his mother, telling her stories about her grandmother's courage and love, the fire passed down through generations. The years that followed weren't easy. Reconstruction's promise gave way to redemption's betrayal as white Southerners reclaimed political power, systematically stripping away rights black people had won. The Ku Klux Klan terrorized black communities. Jim Crow laws enforced segregation and disenfranchisement. The dream of true freedom receded further. But Malik never stopped fighting. He never stopped believing the fire inside him would eventually consume surrounding injustice. He lived to see his children grow strong and proud, his grandchildren born into a world still deeply unfair but no longer enslaved. He lived to tell his story to anyone who'd listen, so future generations would know what had been sacrificed and won. Malik died on March 3, 1919, exactly 70 years after his birth on Beaumont Plantation. Surrounded by his family, 3 generations of free people who owed their existence to a 12-year-old boy who'd refused to die in a coffin. His last words, according to his granddaughter, were, "Keep the fire burning." And they did. His descendants carried his story forward through decades, through the civil rights movement, through the long struggle for equality continuing today. They named their children after him. They told his story to grandchildren. They kept his memory alive, a reminder of what one person could accomplish with courage, determination, and unquenchable fire in their soul. Beaumont Plantation no longer exists. The big house burned in 1873 under circumstances never fully explained. The slave quarters rotted away, returning to earth. Sugarcane fields were eventually sold to other landowners. Today, nothing marks where so much suffering occurred, so many lives broken and destroyed. But in the small cemetery at the old property's edge, 2 graves remain. One belongs to Annie, Malik's mother, who died of fever in 1861. The other belongs to no one because the person buried there didn't stay buried. The coffin is still down there, 6 feet underground, broken open from the inside. Fingernail marks are still visible on the wood, preserved by Louisiana's clay soil. Scientists who've examined the site say it should have been impossible for anyone to escape that coffin, especially a 12-year-old boy weakened by fever and dehydration. But Malik did it anyway. He did the impossible. And in doing so, proved something oppressors throughout history have always tried to deny, that the human spirit cannot be contained, crushed, or buried. That no matter how deep the grave, how tight the chains, there will always be someone who finds a way to break free. This is the lesson of Malik's life, not revenge, though he had every right, not hatred, though he had every reason, but something stronger than both. Something that cannot be nailed into a box, covered with dirt, or erased from history: hope, resistance, the unquenchable fire of freedom. When they buried Malik in 1861, they thought they were disposing of a problem, getting rid of one more troublesome slave. They didn't realize they were creating something far more dangerous than any living person, a legend, a symbol, a story that would outlast them all. The boy who came back from the grave. The soldier who liberated the place of his enslavement. The man who chose justice over vengeance and spent his entire life fighting for the freedom of others. That is who Malik was. That is what he became. And that is why his story matters even now, more than 160 years after a 12-year-old boy opened his eyes in the darkness of a sealed coffin and refused to die. Some fires cannot be extinguished. Some people cannot be buried.